Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Erudition Network Interactive Black History and Knowledge Session. I am your host, Eddie Phillips, and I am here tonight. We were a little bit delayed, I apologize, but I am here tonight for us to endeavor again into some more history, knowledge, and understanding as we do every Thursday. What is this on my shoulder? Every Thursday. And I welcome any of you new viewers. If you're new to the program, if this is the first time that you've actually joined us, welcome to this program. As I said, we venture here tonight to cover history primarily, and to provide some knowledge and some understanding on things that we don't generally cover in schools, in our schools today. All right, I'm gonna see if anybody will come up in here for the live. This program is an interactive program, and that we try very hard every week to open up the chat so that you can come on and ask questions about history, and acquire knowledge. Right. So it is a labor of love. I say this every week to do this because we actually really encourage interaction, people getting involved. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about, with the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, we're going to talk a little bit about the history and the legacy of Dr. King. We're going to get into that tonight within this hour. We're going to talk about some things that maybe aren't generally talked about Dr. King. We've last year we did a forum, and we had many people come on and give their thoughts on Dr. King's last book. But this year we didn't get a chance to do that, and that's okay. But we definitely want to discuss his legacy as this holiday has just passed, as we also get ready to venture into Black History Month. History is something that involves all of us. We all play a part in history. We all play a part in the workings and the timings and the things that happen in this world. I would be remiss to not give time to my grandmother. My grandmother, Annie Phillips, passed away yesterday. It is difficult for me because my grandmother was a praying woman, and I had the fortune of being very close to my grandparents. My mother made sure that me and my sisters, as we grew up, we spent a lot of time with our grandparents, living near them, at sometimes living with them, at other times. And so it's very hard for me to deal with this loss. But at the same time, I am happy that she is no longer suffering. She had been ill. I am happy that she is receiving the reward for a faithful life. I know that when the last time that I saw her, she told me, my grandmother would always tell me that she was praying for me, and that one thing she always told me, and she may have told this to all of her grandkids, but she made sure she told me every time that she saw me, she said, "You are special. God has blessed you." And making me aware to always be a blessing to other people, to always pay forward on the blessings that God provided for me. And so I dealt for a moment thinking, would I do this show tonight? Would I get on here to do this Thursday show? But it's history. It's my ancestors. It's my relative. It's my grandma. And if I can't appreciate that which was right here for me to love, to grow under, then what is history? What is its meaning? The legacies of our ancestors and our forefathers, our grandmothers and our grandfathers is so important because we have to know where we come from. You know, I told people a while back when I'd given out a quiz, and we talked about the Kwazili, the Zulu mentality of Sasha and Zumani. And the Sasha are people who are still known by people who are still alive. My grandmother's children, her grandchildren. And so it's important to remember her and to give reverence to her and my grandfather and those who are still with us in our memories and the experiences that we've had in life. They are not in the Zumani, which are the people who no one remembers, that everyone who they've known has already passed. That's not the case. So we must reference and reverence the people who are still here, who have been here. We got to give credit to both of those people because they play into who we are. Hold your elders tightly. No one is here forever. No one is supposed to be here forever. But the memories stay with us. The memories stay with us. It was a little harder than I thought. But I thank God. That is the point. I thank God for her life. I thank God for the time I got to spend with her. And I just ask that you keep my family in your prayers and in your thoughts as we go forward with what has to be done with her passing. It is always a difficult time during those times, and I just ask that you keep us in your prayers. Well, we don't have many people on tonight, and that's fine. I think the interactive works regardless of whether folks are here or not. So I want to segue into the King holiday that just passed. And reference again why history is so important and why we have to really give time and effort to learning our history. Earlier today, I was sitting there with my wife and I was watching how in the media they were talking about how people are fighting against diversity and how they do not want us to know history. And it's a sad thing because I look back at this every week and I say to myself that when I get on here, regardless of whatever is going on in my life, I try very hard to do this show every Thursday so that we could talk about history, so that we can cover those things that are important and not known. You know, you have people in the government right now. Dr. King's birthday just passed. They will sit here and tell you about Dr. King's dream. They will sit here and they will bloviate on what that dream means to them, while at the same time passing legislation to stop our children from even knowing about the Montgomery bus boycott or the whole of the civil rights movement. And every Thursday, I get on here and I try to give us some thoughts, some push into the past so that we may do better in learning about our history and our ancestors. That's not done easily, but it is an important task. It is needed. And yet, when I look at the media, when I look at the news, when I look at what's going on in society, and I'm constantly hearing about people saying, well, no one knows, this and that, and they didn't know this history. And you look at things and you reflect on history and you say to yourself, how do they not know that this is cyclical? This is something that could have been prevented had these people known this history. But when you offer it, many of us turn away from it. The legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is more than just a "I have a dream" speech. It is more than that. It is about giving of yourself, doing what needs to be done, even to the point of giving your life. As we went through this holiday, I posted on social media saying that if you're only going to think about the dream of Dr. King, then you miss the sacrifice. You miss all of the things that his life meant. Sacrifice, obedience, doing what is put for you to do, your task, your what is the saying out here? The assignment. What is your assignment? What are you placed here to do? Are you placed here to teach? Are you placed here to provide help to someone? We all have an assignment. And far too many of us, me included, we place no emphasis on our assignment because maybe we think that it's too small. Maybe we think it's not significant. Whatever it is, we tell ourselves these things and we don't do what we should do. The assignment. That is the legacy. That is the primary legacy of Dr. King. A man who followed his assignment even if it cost him his life. It's the reason why, despite pains and issues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to be really honest with you, probably more transparent than I've ever been on this program. This past year has not been an easy year. Following the assignment does not mean that it's going to be easy, that it's going to be a walk in the park. But I reflect on my grandmother again. When my grandmother would see me and tell me that you have a purpose, that you special, something that God wants you to do, that's encouragement. Maybe that's your assignment. Maybe that's what you're here to do. To give path to those that come after you. I love to teach, but it does not mean that in the teaching that this does not get hard, get difficult. But I do it because that is what God has given me to do, told me to do. And it doesn't have to be easy. I was looking through, as I often do, some of Dr. King's books over the last few days before the actual federal observance of the holiday. And I was reflecting on some things that Dr. King had said. You know, in his first book, Dr. King wrote a book, Why We Can't Wait, in 1964. And in that book, it revolved around the need for Black people in the United States to progress. To progress. Seems simple, right? But it talks about the early days of the civil rights movement and the struggle that went into the Montgomery bus boycott. It went into the Birmingham campaign. It talked about all of that and the turmoil and the folks who died and were hurt and injured. He talked about all of that because he wanted people to know that this didn't happen. Successes don't happen without toil. And he covered many things in that book. He covered many things, but I think one of the most important things that he tried to talk about in that book was the perception of the Black community to others outside of its community, but more importantly, to itself. Today, when we look at Dr. King, we talk about the dream speech. But we should also focus on the turmoil and the perception that he wanted us to understand. We should also talk about the issues that African Americans, Blacks, whatever you want to call yourself, because we all have different ways that we want to be known and tag ourselves. But he talked about what the issues were, how painful it was for our people to recognize themselves. That is such an important point because even today, when we get out here, we have governors, and I'm going to say his name. We have governors like Ron DeSantis that sit out here and tell us that he wants to fight school books, courses, teachers, people who would teach about the actual validated history of the United States. Because of perception. Something that Dr. King talked about in 1964. Perception. Perception is the reason why we struggle to get people to watch and to learn our history. Perception is the reason why many of us can't go beyond our grandparents and know our family lineage. Perception is why so many of the people in our families didn't pass our own family history down because of the perception of pain, hurt, and drama. And yet, it's not without people trying. It's not without people trying. But here we are. Every year, every day, we're seeing the pains and the problems and the hurts and the crisis of the perception both within and without. And yet, what has to be done, as I look at it, is those who have an assignment to teach, to guide, to mentor, to preach, to be an intercessor, to stand in the gap. Are you following the assignment? Are you looking at the actual example of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? Are you actually living something beyond a dream? I'm talking about reality. Are you a participant in that reality? Do you care to be a participant in that reality? Are you just selling wolf tickets? Are you telling yourself that what I do right now is so important, but you fail to guide, mentor, stand in the gap for young people? It's not easy. It's not easy. You know, I stand sometimes just blown away with how much people don't desire to know. And some are honest. Some tell me very clearly, Eddie, I know you're a historian and I know you know all of this, but I don't want to know. That ain't got nothing to do with me. I'm beyond that point. I don't care. And I try to sit down with people when they say this and be very honest with them about why it's important, why we got to know this, why we got to give our time. And so I'm going to try to do that briefly here tonight. I'm going to try to tell you why it's so important that you know who you are. We are living in a world where folks don't want to even hit at the knowledge, the blessing, as W.B. Du Bois said it, the gift of Black folks. They don't even want you to know about the gift of Black folks. Because, see, if we talk about that gift of people of color, what they've brought to the country, if we actively give ourselves time to know this, then we have to come to some facts and some truth. We got to speak on some things that many of us don't want to speak about. We got to tell that truth. And people don't want to tell that truth. Because, see, what that means is I can't hide behind lies. I told you all last week that as I go through the internet now, I find so many lies. I said it. Lies. So much fallacy. So much bull. Folks who ain't trying to teach you nothing. Creating fictions in their minds. No research, because that's a big thing with us now too. No study, just lies. Because you see, it's easy to lie and create a fiction than to go and sit down and proof, source, cry, get angry over a reality. It is the reason why we could sit here and focus on Dr. King's dream, something that hadn't happened and it hasn't really fully fleshed itself out. It was easy to focus on Dr. King's dream than to work for an actual hard-fought reality. It's easier for us to ignore our history and create a fantasy than to sit here and face a cold, hard fact that we all in this boat together. When the first slaves came over here, for you Americans who are black, who have black folks in your lineage, the first white man or woman that laid down and had babies with these Africans who are part of our lineage, we all family, intermingled together. And so the history of me is the history of you. There's no hate that I can give you because we're family. The problem is when we don't face that fact. The problem is when we lie and we separate ourselves on either side. And we fail to understand the assignment, again, that for the Christian that Jesus gave you, to love one another. But we won't do that. That's too difficult. And so we lie to ourselves. We tell ourselves false truths. And I'm here to tell you tonight, for the few of you who are on here, we got to do better. When I first started Erudition, I made a point to say to people that excuses were gone. You cannot tell me that you don't know history or you don't know these things when there are people here willing to tell you, willing to tell you, giving of their time to tell you. But unfortunately, what I have found is that a lot of people, they want that excuse. They want that excuse. And I'm not going to give it to you. I'm not going to give it to you. One of the things also, when we talk about Dr. King, last year, I spent time and I went over some tenets of Dr. King that I don't think I know we're not taught in school. I know we haven't been taught them in school because here's the thing. Why would I teach you to be radical? Why would I teach you to ask questions? And so, unfortunately, we get in our own way. He gave us tenets because these are the tenets that he lived his life by, that he saw were ways to change the perspective, the perception, both within and without. Not only how we are looked at, but how we see ourselves. You know, one of the speeches that he once made in which he talked about, he also wrote it in his books, he talked about Black people who were enslaved and their idea of value. value. What is value to a slave? What is value to a slave? Does a slave understand value? Do they understand money, wealth? What does that mean to them? And here lies the dilemma that we have, because when we don't look at our past and our history, too many of us can't answer that question. Sad to say, we love perpetuating myths, fantasies, and dreams. Absolutely, Teddy. Absolutely. For those of you who may watch this session later, what is value to a slave? Even the three of people who are online right now, how do you think slaves saw value? Worth, wealth. Did that mean anything to them? The truth is, slaves understood value and worth. They came from cultures, their parents came from cultures who understood value and wealth and trade. They understood it. History shows us how some of the Black enslaved ancestors used the understanding of value. And because we don't understand it today, our entertainers, sports figures, our social influencers, they talk about money, fame, they talk about woke nuance, they talk about all of this stuff, and they flaunt wealth as a form of social affirmation, as something that gives them worth. And we, in turn, as a Vox Populi, as a people, we give them knowledge and we put knowledge upon them, and we give them worth because of how rich they are. We put false intelligence, knowledge, value on people who don't really possess it, because we place that worth based on money. And because we don't understand our history, we fail. We fail to, and we miss the point that men like Dr. King, Malcolm X tried to tell us. We missed those points. Dr. King tried to detail us on how our ancestors, who understood value and wealth and real influence, how they thought. He tried to preach about that in the sermons. Malcolm tried to talk about that in his lessons. They both spoke about the ancestors and how they utilized the understanding of worth and value in a way that even their oppressors didn't really understand. An example of that is the Compensated Emancipation Act. A lot of our ancestors who were freemen, I won't say a lot, a few, their parents, grandparents, who were apprenticed off, that's what they called it, to go work outside of the plantation or work for others. Many times the lazy slave owner, who was not any more educated a lot of times in the South than the actual slave, they would get the wages from the person they were hired out to go take to the master. And some of them would have absconded away. They would take a little bit and hide it. There are stories, how many of them told for years, and so that they could just buy freedom, because that was a legal thing that they could do. but nobody thought they would actually do it. And some would toil away for decades, hiding money, putting it away, even though they themselves died in a slave system. And they slaved these hundreds of dollars, the slave booty that they called it. And they would hide it. And sometimes masters and breakers would know about it, hear about it, and they would go torture or beat and try to go look for this, what they call this Negro treasure. Because they wanted to dissuade other slaves from ever thinking they could buy themselves freedom. But the folks that could use the system, could use that wealth, they bought their freedom. Not for themselves. Not for themselves. And this is important for us to understand. They bought it for those who were coming after them. For us. For our grandparents. It was a hope. But yet we flaunt wealth, gold, rings, watches, clothes, and don't understand the real purpose of wealth should be to help somebody, not just help yourself. And if you go deep enough into your ancestry, you will find folks who understood that, the worth of hard work, the worth of just enduring, so that maybe mine can be free. I don't know if I say that they don't know the value more than I would say that they use the lack of value display through our history as a badge of honor to act out. I don't believe they know value, Teddy. And the reason why I don't believe that they know value in a way that it should be taught is because of what many of them do with it. Influence has a worth. Money has a value. These are all valuable things. These are all valuable things. And while we can't wait, Dr. King gives a story of a man who was given a gas chamber. And though the story has some truth, it's a folktale. But I don't think at the time in 1964 King knew that. But he talked about it, of how a man who was a black man who was given a gas chamber, they used to put a mic in the gas chamber. And how he stood in the gas chamber. And in Dr. King's story, the man was saying, "Help me, Joe Louis," the boxer, the great heavyweight boxer. And Dr. King reflected in his book on how influence, position is important in the idea and the mind of Black people, because this man was screaming for Joe Louis to save him from death because he thought Joe Louis would have some kind of influence that would ensure he wouldn't die. Now, the story wasn't accurate. And I'm going to say this because I believe that sourcing is important. Years later, upon historical reflection, we found that, in fact, the man who Dr. King was talking about was a former boxer who had been given the death penalty. And he wasn't saying, "Save me, Joe Louis." He was screaming, "I fought Joe Louis. I fought Joe Louis," as he was dying. And folks said, "Well, yeah, this proves that Dr. King didn't understand." There wasn't, but again, they don't understand. It's still about influence. What this man was saying, even though the story is a little different, is I have value because I fought Joe Louis. You killing a man here who has value because I interacted with somebody who has value in your mind. What we do with our assignment, what we do with what we're doing here tonight has value. Maybe you don't like the way it's presented to you when people teach. Maybe you don't like the subject. Maybe you don't like how you get it, but there's still value in it. Many of us will go work a job we don't like, toil away, like I spoke earlier about our ancestors, on something we don't like or nor want to do to get paid, because that money has value to feed us, our family, pay our bills. The journey may be arduous. It may be very difficult to learn about things that are cutthroat and evil and hurtful. But that does not take away from the value. But somewhere, we have convinced ourselves, as we get back to Dr. King, somehow we have convinced ourselves that that's not what this is about. We've convinced ourselves that what we've gone through in the past is not that important to my future. We are participating in what Ron DeSantis and others talk about, a woke tug of war. And because we have not given ourselves to faith, given ourselves to knowledge, given ourselves to what we need to grow, we fall short. We don't ask empirical questions. We don't take the steps that are needed to grow. Last year, as I was doing one of the programs, I talked about this about Dr. King. I talked about this on purpose, and I gave you the tenets of Dr. King's life. I told you what they were. I gave you those tenets because I wanted you to understand how he was able to create change. I wanted you to get it, to get the understanding. How do you create change? Unfortunately, far too many of us don't know how. And truthfully, if I were to be very honest with you, really don't want to know how. And that leaves us in a problem with an issue, deep issue, that is going to affect us and those who come after us. We don't understand how special we are. We don't get the value. And so we minimize it. I sat around the day before yesterday, and I was reading this article where a young man was making up history. I said it. He was making up history that did not exist, history that had no reality to it. Just making it up as he went along. And when I looked at the people who were responding to what he was saying, I was like, what are they thinking, right? And I was amazed at how many people were like, man, you spitting truth. When nothing that this young man said was real. Nothing. Some of it was so backward thinking that it would put us back into a position of black codes. And people were co-signing it, thinking that this was woke and knowledgeable. Because, again, this is where we are. When we don't sit down to value anything, when we don't give ourselves the time to learn. I'm going to share this screen before I just pulled this back up. Before I leave the program today. And again, this was something that we shared last year. And I'm going to share it again. It's on my computer. And this is getting back to Dr. King. This is based on the philosophy that Dr. King had, right? I don't know what that is, but I want us to think about this, okay? One of the first things that Dr. King talked about was information gathering. How we gather information is so important. And I've spoken about this ad nauseum for the last few weeks. Our ability to talk about an issue, right? A problem, to investigate it, to be courageous enough to talk about it and gain information about it from all sides, whether it's going to help us or rather it's going to hurt us. But be honest about the information as the information is, to think empirically, to ask those 5 whys, right? To be able to say, hey, who, what, when, where, why. We're not taught in American schools to think empirically. And because we're not taught to think empirically, we're not taught to ask those questions about the information that we receive, we go through our lives not thinking empirically. And we fall into traps. We fall into the cult of knowledge out here that is not valid. Despite the screaming and the booming and the hollering and the beating our chests, at the heart of it, there's no real information in it. And because we fail to become experts in what we want to know, because we fail to study on our own, our family lineage, our culture, to read about the things before we ever get on to listen to someone, whether they're a historian like myself or rather there's some dude who's just on the internet talking random. We can't validate what they're saying in any way because we don't have any example to look towards. I used to tell people who work for me that when you got to a command when I was in the Navy, know one thing, be an expert in something, and go find people who you work with as you work with them and ask them that thing. And you will find at least 3 people. You will find the guy who's just going to BS you and tell you something completely crazy with a plain face. But you will know the truth because you are studied. You're an expert in this. And so you learn, I can't trust that person. He's not the guy I'm going to go to, because if he could lie to me, plain faced about something like that, what would he lie to me about that could cost someone their life, harm me, hurt what we're doing? You might also find a guy who will say, you know what? I don't know. He will be honest with it, but he won't go any further. What does that teach you? That teaches you that that person doesn't want any knowledge. They're comfortable being where they are. They're not seeking any change. They're not seeking to be any more intelligent. They are comfortable with what they know and they don't want to know anymore. And you might also find the guy, the third guy, who will say, I don't know. Let's go find out together. That's the person who you want to work with. That's the person who you want to go through a struggle with, because you know that if something is going on that they don't understand, they are going to want to know. And they're going to want to learn. And if you can learn, you can grow. Information gathering is important. And it's an important tenet beyond the dream that we should understand about the philosophy of Dr. King. Education, that falls into this. It falls into that being an expert. Because once you know something, teach others. Follow your assignment if that's your assignment. Teach others. This will stop misunderstanding. This will allow people to grow beyond just taking information out of your head that comes out of your mouth. They will learn. That's where we should be. We have to grow. And I don't think many of us are getting to the expert level. Expert don't mean you know everything. Expert simply means that you are studied enough that you know the fundamentals. Even an expert can learn. Right. I remember hearing somewhere that the best way to hide something from Black people is to put it in a book. I've heard that too. We are regurgitators because we don't want to be experts. We're willing to throw up anything out of our mouths to appear to be experts. But we don't want to eat the hard thing. Eat the grits that you don't like that grandma make. Eat that soggy cereal that may be nasty because you let it get soggy. But that's the only thing you're going to eat for the day, so that we can nourish the body. We don't want to do the hard work, so that once we've done the hard work, we can educate someone else. We could get them to understand fact, truth. The other thing, personally committed. What's your assignment? Are you committed to your assignment? We look at Dr. King and you can see he was committed. Are you committed to what God? If it's having a podcast, if it's writing a book, if your job is to feed your children every day so that they can be smarter and that they can learn, grow to help others, that's your assignment. You need to be committed to that. Not because, as he said, have hidden motives. Not because you want to be obsequious, trying to please somebody else. You have to be committed, even when you're tired, even when you don't feel like doing it, even when they get on your nerves. Because that's the only way to make change. These are lessons that you ain't getting in the I Have a Dream speech. This is the philosophy that he lived by. And yet, you ain't taught this in school. And when we teach you this history, somebody got to be committed to doing it. Negotiation. Sometimes when you doing what you got to do, people don't want to hear you. They tell you quite literally to shut the H up. I told you earlier, I don't want to do this. This ain't got nothing to do with me. But you got to look beyond that. And you got to get to a point being positive and push, even if it's simply hello every day. I've been watching this show, Ted Lasso, on Apple TV. And every day this man would come in, and the lady in the beginning of the show, she was mad. She wanted him to fail. But he every day he came in positive. Every day he came in positive to eventually he won her over. Simply because he refused to stop. Negotiation is a part of that commitment. Pull somebody into the positive, even when they negative. And that ain't easy. And that's without humiliating them. That's without making them feel less than themselves. I'm not on here to call you dumb. I'm not on here to call you stupid. I'm here to tell you, you should know this. And I'm going to show you why you should. And I'm going to talk to you. And I want you to understand the value of our history, of our knowledge, and how it will help our young people as well as our older folks. Connections. Negotiating beyond the desire to just quit. I'm going to try to get through these last two. My favorite, direct action. Direct action happens when the people you're talking to, they don't want to listen to you. Sometimes they might even get to a point where they walk away. That tension is so strong. So what do with direct action? Let them do what they're doing. You go and find others to teach. That's what I did. You go and continue your assignment in other areas. And I guarantee you, those same people who was against you in the beginning, when the crowd starts saying, wait a minute, I like what this person is doing, or I want to be a part of that. Watch how those who were forcefully, angrily not wanting to be with you turn to try to act as if they are, even if they're just acting. You see that with the people who were directly against civil rights. But on television and in the media, right, when the crowd says, we love Dr. King and I have a dream, they get up here with their pompous line, fictitious tales, and they tell you to your face, yeah, I agree with the dream. Because they don't want to go against the crowd. Direct action will cause things to change because your opponent has no choice but to change. That's the lesson in our neighborhoods. When you can't reach that gang member, that drug dealer, but maybe you can reach his brother, his cousin, his family. Maybe you could change that family even if you can't reach that one. That's direct action. Lastly, reconciliation. Reconciliation is simply trying to reconcile by trying to understand, compromising where you can, standing firm where you have to, so that you can bring people together. Because we don't know everything. Reconciliation is the admittance that maybe I don't know everything. What is your part of it? What can I learn from you? What's your assignment? Maybe your assignment is here to teach me too. Ladies and gentlemen, when you watch this episode, I want you to start thinking in that way. I want you to start realizing the importance of what you're doing in your day-to-day life, with your kids, with your friends, with your family. What are you here to do? Are you following those tenets that I just talked to you about with Dr. King? Are you thinking about the perception, both within and without, of how you represent and how others represent our culture? Are you doing what you're assigned to do to further understanding? That is the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. That is the legacy of our ancestors who gave all so that you can still be here to do better. I love doing this show because that's my assignment. And it ain't easy. It could be disheartening, but I do it. And I'm going to keep doing it. Teddy, I've heard if hearing truth makes you don't be mad at the truth, be mad at the lie that made you feel comfortable. Some people just want to be comfortable, though. Lastly, the problem is people right now love to be controversial, so whatever they think makes others uncomfortable, they feel they need to jump on board because it must be true. Brother, we're here, what you do, with your program, what people are out here doing. This is a new year, new day, new time. We have to be better. We have to do better. So it's not going to be easy when you get on here and do these programs. When we try to teach our children, they don't want us to teach. They are fighting us politically, spiritually, and in some ways physically for you not to get this knowledge. They're teaching you what they want you to know. Who are they? The folks in power, not white, not black, people in power who want to maintain that power. And if you're not trained, if you don't follow those tenets, if you don't gather the information, if you don't educate yourself, if you don't commit yourself, if you don't do any of those things, you're not going to be able to withstand the influence, the propaganda, the fallacy, and the lies. Folks who are getting on these programs like I Am Tonight to teach you freely, to give you this knowledge that they're denying you. I hope you utilize it. I hope you share it. I hope you grow it, because that's the only way we're going to change. We're going into another Black History Month as I get ready to get out of here. And I want you all to understand the assignment, validation, sourcing, knowing what you're talking about, knowing it, so that when you get on TikTok, YouTube, whatever, and somebody says something that is not right, you can stop, say, brother, maybe you need to go look here. Sister, maybe you need to go look here. Because they want knowledge, but they eating anything they can to survive. And because it's not real, they throwing it out and throwing it up and regurgitating it to everybody. Let's do better. Thank you all for your time tonight. This is a hard day, as I said. Lost my grandmother. But I thank you all for another Thursday. I thank you for this interactive. And I hope you gain something from it, and I hope that you share it. But until next Thursday, I will see you then. And we will be back for another session, another lesson. Hey, let's get people on here next week, and let's have a really good discussion as we get ready to go into Black History Month. All right. Well, God bless you, and God keep you all for the rest of this what's left of this week. And I did not put my ticker up, Teddy. I forgot. I do apologize. If you want to help the program in any kind of way, this is how you would do it. You see it ticking down here at the bottom. We appreciate any help that you possibly can give in helping us to grow this program. But until next week, ladies and gentlemen, God keep you and God bless you. Thank you.